Hey besties, welcome back to another episode of Sunshine and Rainbows podcast, a space where we chat about moments when life isn't. I'm your host Amanda, and I am so passionate about peeling back that veil our society has constructed around perfectionism online. When starting my own personal platform on Instagram, I realized that I was getting caught in the inauthentic hustle, and it was severely affecting my mental health. Mostly because I was comparing my behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. Throughout my life, I've come to own that my setbacks were actually just set-ups for something better. I found a way to step into my true potential, and the goal is to amplify other voices who have done the same so that someone out there feels seen and that much less alone. I cannot wait to get into this important conversation with our next guest. So, let's get started. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sunshine and Rainbows podcast. I'm your host Amanda, and today things are going to be a little bit different. So, today's my birthday. Wow. I turn 29 today, and when thinking about what I was going to do for this episode, I was between listing 29. I wish I was turning 21. 29 things that I had learned this year, doing a year recap of everything that I accomplished. And the way I operate is I like to get things out on a page. So when I was doing my solo episodes at the beginning of this whole podcast adventure, I would write down my thoughts, and they were so good that I ended up just reading them. So I'm not going to say I wrote a script, but I definitely wrote down what I was thinking. Again, I'm a very visual person, so seeing words on a page really makes my feelings real for me. And I decided to go back to my roots. So I started journaling, and then journaling turned into writing. And before I knew it, I had pages and pages of feelings. And they turned out to be so powerful that even though it was my private journal entry, I think it needs to be heard. So again, things are going to be a little bit different. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm reading my journal entry. If you're listening here on whatever podcast platform, you're not going to know a difference. So I'm kind of nervous. I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of nervous. I have written fiction before, my children's book, but I've never actually written and published something that is this personal. And even though my job right now is quite literally to share my life on the internet, I haven't shared this part of me before, and I really got deep. So, without, I guess, further ado, here we go. All right. So I'm sitting here trying to type out my first journal entry turned blog post days before my 29th birthday, and I'm coming up blank. For someone whose job it is to share online, why does it feel a little too personal to write about myself here? Existential crisis aside, I guess we'll jump to the start. Hi, I'm Amanda. I can be described as a 28-year-old woman who has blue eyes, dirty blonde hair, and is taller than average. I'm a Capricorn, Enneagram 3, Wing 4, and a proud Slytherin. I was born in Texas, spent a third of my life in Missouri, and now reside in the Sunshine State of Florida. If you knew me in high school, I'm sorry. I was your stereotypical cheerleader who was a die-hard Swiftie and Joe Bros fan. I literally had a life-size cardboard cutout of Jacob from Twilight in my bedroom, and honestly can't tell you a thing about me that was unique during that time. And that was actually on purpose. My whole life, I've been teased and bullied for being different. Sometimes it was that I was too tall for a girl, whatever that means, too smart, too blonde, too churchy, too much of a teacher's pet, and too nice. It got to the point that I found it easier to blend in and be one of the status quo than make any waves. I learned to stifle my sparkle and became ashamed of what made me me. This is the first time I can remember feeling like something was wrong. Sure, I'd experienced sadness before, but this was different. I was consumed. I was encompassed. I felt like I was being swallowed, was drowning, and didn't know how to tell anyone. I was ashamed because I thought it was something that was wrong with me, that I wasn't strong enough or emotionally mature enough to handle my teenage years. I stuffed those feelings deep, deep down and threw myself into activities that made my sparkle come out in safe spaces that celebrated me. Performing. That's where I found my first community of people that accepted me, encouraged me, and related to what I was feeling. I also learned that I wasn't alone in my feelings of deep depression. Most artists are consumed by it too, but some have found a way to use it to their advantage. It was here that I also saw various ways people cope with that sadness they can't contain. I quickly learned that there were many vices people used to drown out their feelings of pain, shame, and emotional turmoil, especially how destructive it could be when the proper outlets and help weren't available. I knew that I didn't want that for my life, but sometimes the depression I felt was deeper than my want to power through. I limped my way internally through high school, a tumultuous relationship, a crushing dance injury, and moving states with my family to escape it all. My last year in Missouri, I made a mess of things. I ruined relationships, friendships, and any sense of decency I had left because I was drowning. I felt like I was screaming, but no one could hear me. It's not actually anyone's fault outright. You see, 10 years ago was a very different time for mental health. And I wholeheartedly know now that all of the signs were there of my severe depression and anxiety. But those were adult issues and ones that hadn't been as common in teens or small kids. Even though I couldn't differentiate between my spiraling mental health hormones or if it was just a phase that I was in. When we moved to Florida, I felt like it was my chance for a fresh start. I I literally just ran away from all my problems and triggers in Missouri so I could create this new version of Amanda. I quite literally changed the way people referred to me. I used to go by Mandy with an I my entire life up until I moved to Florida. And even now when a family member or friend slips up, I get a twinge of that old me. I moved out, I started 2 jobs to pay for rent, and applied to any college to begin my chance at an important and worthy life. I desperately wanted to make everyone proud and regain their love for me that I had ruined, in my mind, because of the shitstorm I started in Missouri. I got into an advanced collegiate program, joined the honors college, and knew that in the fall of 2012, I could finally start my life for real. Now, college was just another version of high school because I began repeating old patterns. Sure, there was more flair. I traded cheer for dance and sorority events, bullies for eating disorders, and shame for anger. The spiral was constant, but sneaky this time. You see, Tumblr depression culture was in. No one noticed when you spent all night in the library drinking 5 cups of coffee to power through your thoughts of taking an endless nap because you were just a great student who cared about their grades. College was rough. And even though I met my now husband during that tornado, even he could see the signs and patterns of instability I was creating. Everything was personal. Everything felt life or death. Everything was at 100 out of 10. I was passionate, I was extroverted, I was bold, but I also was so alone in my thoughts. I truly think the only thing that saved me was the structure. I thrived on routine and kept mine seamless in high school and college. Go to school, do homework, go to practice, call boyfriend, study, go to work, rinse, repeat. After graduating, I traded the structure of school for the structure of fighting my way into the animal training field. I studied clawed into any volunteer or part-time position I could find, and finally achieved my dream of becoming a dolphin trainer. I had made it. This was what all those years in pain were for, to get me here. I rationalized my brain that every late night, missed holiday, and sacrifice was worth it. I was here and I would never feel sad again because I had accomplished something few people do. While it wasn't my ultimate dream job, it was enough that I felt special. I could walk into a room and know without a doubt that I was the person with the coolest occupation. And that was a drug that gave me such a high. You see, to my core, I wanted to feel special, needed, and important. Is it because I was stifled at such a young age by teasing and bullies? Or was it just a narcissistic personality trait? Regardless, it was me. I liked being shiny. I liked when the glitter and the sparkles surrounded me. It's where I thrived and I felt most myself. The spotlight is what I always wanted. When I was the center of attention, I didn't have time to focus on the darkness inside. So I stuffed it far down and wouldn't let it have the oxygen it needed to grow. That was my plan. Stuff, stuff, and stuff some more, so eventually it'll just go away. Yeah, that's not how it happened. So I jumped a few more animal jobs before finally reaching what I thought was the top. On one October morning, I got the call I'd been dreaming of my entire life. I had gotten the position of killer whale trainer, and my life was about to change. I reveled in every moment someone came up to me after hearing the news around work. I would reply humbly, but on the inside, I was screaming with pride. I started my new position and felt incredible. I was Amanda, the killer whale trainer. I wore the coveted wetsuit. I spoke on microphone in front of thousands of people daily. I had little kids requesting photos with me. It was the biggest ego fluff I've ever experienced, and I was loving every single moment. And that's where the beginning of our story actually starts. You see, it was at my highest that I truly felt my lowest. Imposter syndrome reared its ugly head. My eating disorders and body dysmorphia were in full motion. I was seemingly thriving, but internally, I was barely surviving. 6 months into my new position, and I get a call that I never could have anticipated. A company-wide layoff, and my name was on the list. While any rational person could look at the situation and see that it was a business decision for a struggling company, I took it personally. I took it way too personal because it shattered my entire existence, purpose, and identity that I had constructed. You see, this image I created was becoming an alter ego. And when it got ripped away from me without warning, all that remained was the real me. She was broken. She was depressed. She was anxious. She was drowning and didn't know how much longer she could stay afloat. So instead of facing those issues head on and getting to the source, I ran again. Running was easier than stopping. Pivoting, how I coined it, because after all, the image I had created was technically a publicity stunt. I had been an expert marketer and didn't even realize it. I needed to be head of the questions, so I found a job that no one I knew in the animal field worked and charged headfirst into a new vision. I was now Amanda, killer whale trainer turned elephant keeper, the girl who took a curveball and made it a grand slam. I was writing my memoir in my head of how bold and strong and courageous I was for finding the beauty in my awful situation. I truly loved working with those new animals. It showed me how close-minded I had been on what it meant to be a trainer and how everyone had their own dreams that were just as special. I felt special again and finally felt like I had a voice within a company that listened. I learned how to lead a team and got opportunities to help shape the next generation with interns. I was on a TV show, made amazing connections with the marketing team, and even had plans to move up within the company. Until 2020 and all its madness hit. I'll keep this portion brief because, yet again, a pattern unfolded that I repeated without learning from. I was furloughed. I felt crushed, unimportant, and unworthy. All my feelings of severe depression, crippling anxiety, and taking it extremely personal all came flooding back. I finally come back to work after things slowed down a little bit, but it felt different. I was full of anger that I couldn't find the root of or shake. I had this enormous chip on my shoulder that was beginning to infect every aspect of my life. I became the most negative person I knew. I was the source of toxicity, and I couldn't find a way to stop. I complained, gossiped, and created drama in my own life just for the chance to feel something, anything. I didn't know who I was, and I couldn't recognize myself anymore. My face was in a constant frown, and it took far too much effort to pretend to be happy that I just quit altogether. An opportunity to leave that job for a completely different career arose, and naturally, I jumped. Can you see the patterns? Can you see that I desired structure, but on my terms and in my own specific dimensions? Is it making sense that I ran from every new problem and they were all compounding and getting to the point that I could not keep them at bay much longer? Because, wow, it's crystal clear to me now. I created this identity crisis in my head of leaving the animal field to help myself cope. Because, in all honesty, I don't think I ever knew who I was. I don't think I wanted to know who I truly was. Because every time I was alone with my thoughts, I didn't like that Amanda. 2021 came with a new, improved version of Amanda. She was brave for leaving her dream job in search of a new dream. She was brave for calling out toxic patterns. She was inspiring for forging ahead despite life's unfair curveballs. She was special, unique, and different all over again. To be honest, I really believed that, and parts of it might be true. But parts are an image I'd curated, like a perfect aesthetic on Instagram. Eventually, I started trying to figure out who Amanda might be, what she liked, and why she was here. I began rediscovering old passions and hobbies, found my voice in advocating for mental health, and created a podcast that helped break some mindsets. I even had the incredible opportunity to begin authoring an inclusive children's book series based on my animal career and tying in some very important messages. Life was great until the summer. The high of being an entrepreneur and trailblazer had finally begun to wear off, and my structure was fading. I was feeling my longest friend, depression, creep back in, this time at a ferocity I had never encountered. Before, I could cope via dance party, binging my favorite TV show, or grabbing an iced coffee and screaming some punk rock music. Hey, we all find serotonin differently, okay? But this time, none of that was working. I asked my primary care physician for help. The anxiety and depression meds I had been on for years were not helping anymore. I begged for every test she could think of that I could Google. I honestly had convinced myself that it was all a thyroid issue, a faulty IUD, or an awful coincidence that all these symptoms were piling up at an unnerving rate. I was searching for answers, but every test kept coming back negative. All my blood work was clear. You're just depressed and overweight, Amanda. You work from home now, in the middle of a pandemic. Everyone is in literally the same boat as you, was the last thing my doctor said to me before I stormed out in tears. I felt like no one was listening to me. I could feel myself fading. My whole life was swirling around me and I had zero control. I was exhausted just by existing. It took every ounce of effort I had to continue working, which left nothing when it was time to be a friend, sister, daughter, or wife. I can distinctly remember the first time I thought, everyone can't feel the way I do all the time. How are people still alive? I made a choice. I wanted to stick around. Despite my brain telling me that I didn't matter, that I wasn't worth the oxygen, and that people would be just fine without me, I chose to fight. I called my primary care, asked for a referral to a psychiatrist, and everything I learned in college was pointing to some undiagnosed mental health disorder. And it was time to get a professional's opinion on the right medication. Even at my lowest, I knew that upping my depression meds, like my doctor was, should have made me feel better, not worse. A week before my psychiatrist appointment, I took the online questionnaire that I knew would help them diagnose me. I answered questions ranging from family history, mentality, thoughts, and even experiences I'd been through. I remember being terrified of answering too honestly because I didn't want to get sent away for being that mentally ill. But I decided to answer truthfully. I needed help, and I was finally low enough to scream it out loud. I walked into the office, I sat down, anticipating a long list of what made me unhealthy because clearly I had made this all up for attention in my head, right? I held my breath, hands clasped. She walked in, sat down, took a big drink of water, and asked me, "Hey, how you doing?" "Not good. I'm drowning. I'm exhausted just by existing. Help me." I screamed internally, but I answered with, "Oh, I'm fine." She called me on my BS right then and there. We began talking about my symptoms and answers to the questionnaire I took a week earlier. She told me that in the depression category, I scored a 30 out of 30. Sweet, 100%, I thought. But she went on to explain it meant that I was severely and undoubtedly depressed. She diagnosed me immediately with major depressive disorder. I was relieved. While I always knew that I had depression, I thought it was just a product of my experiences or my environment. Not that my brain was literally chemically imbalanced. That made it easier for me to rationalize and accept. Next, she shared my score for the anxiety section. 29 out of 30. "Honey, you've got some pretty severe anxiety with no direct correlation," she said. Basically, I was a textbook case of generalized anxiety disorder. It made sense to me. I knew that the way my brain overanalyzed, reanalyzed, and functioned could not be how anyone else existed. It was clear that certain pressures sent me into anxiety attacks while having zero effect on others. It was another sigh of relief for me, and I thought we were done. Nothing I didn't already know and couldn't handle. Well, we weren't done. She went on to ask about the vivid and severe nightmares I answered about, situations that brought them on, and her concern for my lack of sleep. It turns out that not everyone wakes up screaming in the middle of the night. Not everyone sweats in their sleep while kicking and screaming. Not everyone became an insomniac because they were afraid of falling asleep. And that not just someone who had big T traumas, as she titled it, could have post traumatic stress disorder. PTSD? Me? Sure, I could think of some little T traumas in my life, and maybe one or two big Ts, but nothing like being a war veteran. She explained that my brain was under stress for years and began blending the lines of danger and reality to the point that it could not tell the difference. My constant anxiety, coupled with life experiences and a high stress career, were the perfect recipe for something called compassion fatigue. It created proxy symptoms of PTSD. I could combat them while awake and convince my brain that my thoughts weren't reality. But when I would fall asleep, my fear receptors took over. Cool. I could swallow that. I could rationalize that. I mean, it made sense when I looked back at my life and even thought of seeing so much death and sickness within my short lived animal career. But when I looked at her and made the comment, "So where do we go from here?" She just chuckled. "Amanda," she replied, "we've only just begun. You see, those are all byproducts of what actually is going on underneath all that coping you've managed to do for years. I sat there holding my breath. She saw me more deeper than anyone I knew, and she'd only just met me and read my answers on a page. Crap. I made eye contact, let out my breath, and asked her what she meant. The next part was all a blur, but something I think I'd always suspected deep down. You see, it runs in my family's genetics. I studied it in college and can remember sitting in the lecture hall thinking, I do that. I feel that. Am I that? Media's depicted it, artists sing about it, and someone in my family even died from it. Bipolar. Turns out it's been hiding all along. Turns out it's been dropping hints all along. Turns out a lot of how I'd been feeling made perfect sense and was a textbook bipolar 2 case. Turns out this was the first time I was overwhelmingly grateful that I wasn't special, that I was textbook, because it meant I finally had answers. Turns out the reason I was spiraling out of control while upping my depression meds is because they were the wrong meds. Turns out all my symptoms were pointing to this. I just needed the right person to decode it. I sat there, stunned, reeling, shocked. I slowly started replaying clips from my entire life where I could see that maybe it wasn't just a personality trait, but maybe it was a mental disorder. Maybe that's why I could go until I crashed, farther than the average person. Maybe that's why I got these incredible bursts of creativity, energy, detailed organization, and extrovertedness. Maybe that's why when those moments faded, I could barely pull myself out of bed. Maybe that's why the majority of my 20s felt like the scene in Twilight where Bella sits in her chair and the seasons keep changing around her, but she's a statue. Was bipolar 2 actually why? Naturally, I cried. Feelings come out my eyeballs, regardless of if they're happy, sad, or angry. I called Kev. I called my sister. I called my best friend. And then I called my therapist and immediately went into process with her. So here's the actual point of this story and why I'm sharing all of this. She didn't believe me. She wanted a second opinion. She said that there was no way. She specialized in mood disorders and would have seen the signs in me. But that's the funny thing and why I've decided to share all of this. People only know what you tell them. I'm going to say it again. People only know what you tell them. People only know what you show them. Your therapist can't read your mind. Your primary physician can't read your mind. Regardless if you're screaming inside like I was. People only hear what you tell them. I'm telling you this because I got scolded by everyone in my life that I called above. Kev knew the majority of my feelings because he sees me so deeply like no one else can. But he didn't know everything. My sister knew I was struggling, but I didn't want to burden her with my problems because she was fighting demons of her own. My best friend was in the dark because I was talking about my problems and it seemed selfish, so I didn't. I mean, look at what the world was navigating. My therapist was only told things that I already had processed, so when she gave me homework or challenged me, I was one step ahead and never felt vulnerable. Because again, I needed control. So, it's been 4 months since I walked around the mall alone, because if I was in public, I would burst into tears for no reason. Yeah, that's how unregulated my emotions had become. I was a tsunami of moods that changed quicker than my fashion sense, to the point that Kevin didn't know what version of me he'd get. It's been 4 months since my last suicidal thought. It's been 4 months since I had to consciously pull myself out of bed. It's been 4 months since I faked a smile or lied about being fine. Now, I'm on a cocktail of meds. They actually serve me and my needs. I'm sleeping. My depressive episodes are less life-altering, and my manic episodes feel regulated. You see, I love my medication. For the first time, I actually feel like I'm the one living my own life. I feel like an active participant instead of convincing everyone around me that I'm living. I own my emotions. I own the roller coaster and the waves that come because they're what make me special. It took time to process, grieve, and unlearn the societal norms around mental illness. I had tackled depression, anxiety, but PTSD and bipolar 2 are new beasts that come with pretty awful stereotypes. I realized that my disorder didn't define me, but if anything, it gave me new purpose and a reason to keep advocating. Again, it's days before my 29th birthday, and I've just written what I think is going to be the premise of my memoir someday. My favorite thing that was said to me mid sob was, Amanda, this isn't the end. This isn't just another powerful chapter in your story that will change someone's life someday. Side note, if you don't have a Kev in your life, I really suggest you find one. Wow. I'm sharing because I finally processed, accepted, and fully own who I am. Like, fully. I'm sharing because in the midst of this crisis, I had never felt more alone, even though I was surrounded by so many supported loved ones. I'm sharing this because I learned some valuable lessons about letting people in and allowing others to help. I'm sharing this because I never want anyone to feel the way I did. So there you go. That is a journal entry turned post that I put on my blog, on my website, made into a podcast episode, and now a YouTube video. I don't know. After writing it, it just felt like it was something that I needed when I was going through what I was going through years ago, months ago, moments ago. So I put this out there to the universe, not to bring attention to me, not to capitalize on a new disorder, but to just be honest. I pride myself on being honest online, but I wasn't honest to the people in my life. I wasn't honest to myself. And this has been the most cathartic thing I think I've done my entire life. I really dug deep and looked into my past and faced it head on. So, it's my 29th birthday. And year 26 broke me. Year 27 challenged me. And year 28 showed me why. So, here's to year 29.